This episode of Stories from the Vault contains descriptions of violence, gunfire, and disturbing historical events. Viewer discretion is advised. Get 15% off your first order with code VAULT at pettymerch.xyz.
Wilshire Unit City, Wilshire Unit 211, GTA just occurred, 3921 Wilshire Boulevard, 3921 Wilshire Boulevard, incident 329, any Wilshire Unit code 2 high.
Now, let's step back to May 1970, to a college campus that became the center of a national tragedy, Kent State University in Ohio. The spring of 1970 was turbulent in America. The Vietnam War had been escalating for years, and the opposition to the conflict was reaching a fever pitch. College campuses became battlegrounds of political activism, student strikes, and protests. Kent State University, a public school of nearly 17,000 students, was no exception. Students were politically engaged, frustrated by the war, and wary of the Nixon administration's policies. ROTC programs were present on campus, representing a direct link to the military and to the war many students opposed. Tensions had been rising for weeks. The nation had just learned of President Nixon's decision to expand the war in Vietnam into Cambodia, which inflamed an already volatile student body. Demonstrations were growing in frequency and intensity, and the university administration struggled to maintain order. By early May, Ohio Governor James Rhodes and local officials were on high alert. The National Guard was mobilized to monitor the campus, initially as a show of use of force to prevent property damage and potential escalation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the nation and leave 4 students dead. On May 1, 1970, President Nixon announced the expansion of the Vietnam War into Cambodia. This decision ignited outrage across campuses nationwide. Protests erupted almost immediately, and Kent State became one of the focal points of student activism. Tensions escalated over the next few days. Students organized marches, rallies, and demonstrations demanding an end to the war. Many were peaceful, but frustration boiled over in pockets of anger. On May 2nd, an ROTC building on campus was set on fire during a protest. While no one was injured, the act heightened fears of violence and property damage. Ohio Governor James Rhodes responded by calling in the National Guard. By May 3rd, dozens of guardsmen were stationed on campus, heavily armed and prepared for confrontation. Their presence was meant to deter unrest, but to many students it was a symbol of intimidation, a stark reminder that authority would meet dissent with force. Skirmishes between students and guardsmen began immediately. Rock throwing, verbal confrontations escalated tensions. Campus leaders tried to negotiate, but mistrust ran deep on both sides. The stage was set for the events of May 4th, a protest that would end in tragedy, forever etching Kent State into the national memorial. The morning of May 4th, 1970 began tense and overcast at Kent State University. Students gathered on the Commons, the central open area of the campus, prepared to protest the war in Cambodia. Many carried signs, chanted slogans, and voiced their outrage peacefully. Others, fueled by fear and frustration, paced nervously, unsure of how events would unfold. Across campus, the Ohio National Guard had established positions, armored and armed, watching the gathering with vigilance. The guardsmen had orders to maintain control and prevent further damage after the ROTC building fire. But communication and coordination were inconsistent. Different units received varying instructions, adding confusion to an already tense environment. Protesters began to march, moving in loose groups across the lawn. Shouts of anger echoed, and rocks were thrown, not yet directed at the guardsmen, but in the chaos, tension mounted. The National Guard, standing in formation, lifted their rifles and tried to assert control, shouting commands to disperse. Minutes stretched into a seemingly endless standoff. The students, unsure whether to retreat or continue, froze at times, then advanced in small clusters. Negotiations and attempts to de-escalate were minimal. The air was thick with fear and adrenaline. At approximately 12:24 p.m., confusion erupted. A protester may have moved towards the guardsmen or shouted a challenge. Accounts differ. In that critical moment, some guardsmen fired warning shots while others discharged weapons directly towards the crowd. Within 13 seconds, 28 shots rang out across the commons. 4 students were killed: Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Schuer, and William Schroeder. 9 others were wounded, some critically. Eyewitnesses described chaos. Students diving to the ground, screaming and attempting to help their friends. Smoke and dust from spent cartridges filled the air. Some guardsmen reportedly shouted for calm, while others appeared stunned by the sudden eruption of violence. The aftermath was immediate and harrowing. Ambulances rushed to the scene, carrying the injured to local hospitals. Survivors, shocked and traumatized, huddled in small groups, whispering about what had just happened. The sound of gunfire faded, leaving silence that was heavier than any shout. Journalists arrived quickly, capturing the carnage and spreading images across the nation. Photos of fallen students and distraught classmates circulated widely, igniting outrage and debate. What had been a protest transformed into a national tragedy, forever changing the conversation about civil unrest and authority, and the consequences of escalation. News of the Kent State shooting spread across the nation within hours. Headlines screamed tragedy. Images of students lying dead on a campus lawn shocked Americans and drew widespread condemnation. President Nixon, addressing the nation days later, dismissed some criticism, referring to the demonstrators as bums. His comments further inflamed public opinion, deepening the divide between government officials and the generation of students demanding accountability. Across the nation, campuses erupted in protests. Strikes were called at over 400 colleges and universities, involving more than 1 million students. Students marched in cities, held vigils, and voiced angers at the perceived overreach of state authority. The National Guard's role came under intense scrutiny, with many questioning whether lethal force had been justified. The media played a crucial role in shaping public perception. Photographs, newspapers, reports, and television broadcasts captured the raw horror of that day. Pulitzer Prize-winning images like that of Mary Ann Vecchio kneeling over the body of Jeffrey Miller became endearing symbols of the tragedy and the power of visual journalism. Internally, law enforcement and government officials scrambled to explain the events. Investigations began almost immediately, but conflicting reports and inconsistent eyewitness accounts made it difficult to form a clear narrative. What was undeniable, however, was the impact on public trust. For many Americans, the shooting marked a turning point, a stark reminder of the fragility of civil liberties when fear and authority collide. Kent State became a symbol of protest, of generational conflict, and of the dangerous consequences when escalation goes unchecked. In the days and weeks following May 4th, investigations into the Kent State shooting sought to determine responsibility and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Multiple inquiries examined the actions of the Ohio National Guard, the university administration, and state officials. The Scranton Commission, appointed to study the events, concluded that the National Guard had overreacted to a volatile situation. The commission highlighted poor communication, inadequate crowd control training, and a lack of clear orders as contributing factors. No guardsmen were criminally prosecuted, a decision that fueled public outrage. The FBI, meanwhile, documented the incident extensively, collecting eyewitness testimonies, photographic evidence, and autopsy reports. Files released in the vault revealed the depth of federal scrutiny, including internal debates over whether shootings could trigger wider unrest. These documents underscore how seriously the government took both the public relations fallout and the potential for escalating student protest nationwide. Civil litigation followed. In 1979, the families of the 4 students killed and the 9 wounded reached a settlement with the state of Ohio for $675,000, coupled with a statement acknowledging the students' rights had been violated. While the settlement provided some measure of closure, it could never fully repair the trauma inflicted on the victims, their families, or the nation. Kent State left a profound legacy. It reshaped public discourse on student activism, civil liberties, and the use of force by law enforcement. Annual commemorations, historical research, and museum exhibits keep the memory alive, reminding each generation of the human cost of political conflict and the delicate balance between protest and authority. The tragedy also influenced future federal and state policies on crowd management and National Guard deployment, serving as a grim case study for law enforcement and political leaders alike. Kent State remains etched in the American consciousness as a warning. When dissent meets unchecked authority, even peaceful protests can end in catastrophe. Next time on Stories from the Vault, we'll pivot from the tragedy of student protest to the covert world of espionage. Operation Monopoly, where the FBI secretly dug a tunnel beneath the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., revealing a tale of paranoia, surveillance, and Cold War intrigue. Until next time, lock the file and remember, the truth is rarely redacted forever. I'm Kyle Fields. This has been Stories from the Vault. Have a good night.